I regret that I have found myself old, bitter, and utterly alone. I have my nurses to help me wipe my ass after I have shit myself, usually on purpose and for spite, but not always. And I have my doctors who visit quite frequently and are paid very well to do so, might I add. At 93, I have let myself die alone, but in the end, I suppose we all have to die alone. I did once love, however. It was so much longer than I care for it to have been, under the unique circumstances. But I loved. Deeply and fervently, I loved her. She was not your ordinary woman, if standard definition would even allow her to be categorized as such. She was beautiful as a fresh-picked dandelion in a child's hands, and softly curved like a country road. Not like the girls that grow now. The girls of today have to be well-breasted and have an ass like a coffee table, and that has never appealed to me much. Well, in a few cases of restrained and undignified lust, I had wished for one of the bigger-chested of my nurses' top just to magically disintegrate, and her brassiere to fly off across the room without her knowledge. That led to me wishing for some unbeknownst reason that she would just start doing jumping jacks, and lost in the thought that should have belonged exclusively to a younger man. They would find me pleasing myself. But it wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. Pardon my digression. Those thoughts always make me feel guilty. She was the only one for me. I doubted that in my youth. There will be someone else. I told myself this many times, but it would never be true. And only now do I realize there will be no other to satisfy my longing for women. She was it, and I am perfectly fine with that. I will die without knowing the carnal pleasures of a woman, other than when the nurses have to wash my wrinkled old balls. But that piston stopped working decades ago, and it still means nothing to me. It was the late 40s or early 50s, I don't remember precisely. I was around 20 years and a lot less flabby than I am now. I was strong and had a good knowledge of labor. I worked as a field hand at a farm down the road. It was a small town with nothing spectacular to behold for any man of business or vice. It was home, the whole kit and kabang, according to Norman Rockwell. A small soda shop near the edge of town and a drive-in movie for the lovebirds to neck at was the extreme of our entertainment options then. Otherwise, we were your average farming town. There was a couple of feed stores on opposite ends of town. A cotton mill dead center of it all, complete with the strings of small houses dedicated specifically to the mill workers, stretched 5 rows up the side of the only hill in the area. The rest was cotton fields and fruit orchards, mostly. My father worked at the mill, and we lived in an old mill house at the tip top of the hill. From my room window I could spy down on all the mill workers' daughters, as they undressed in the privacy of their rooms, or watch them sunbathe half-naked behind their house during plant hours. My mother once caught me looking down on one bathing in a number 2 tub, leaning out my window and stroking myself as fast as I could, and I prided myself on speed. She came in silently and walked me over the back with the large family Bible. She hit me so hard I lost my balance and went out my window, tumbling down the hill, with my pecker just flopping as I rolled in, end over end, down into the Lutz's backyard. As I lay there, dizzy and disoriented, I realized that I had skint the poor bastard on the aluminum casing around my window. But still, none of those girls would mean a nickel on a donut hole, bet, in comparison to her. In my youth, I loved to fish the Devil's Fork River. It ran through town straight as an arrow and split off into a Y shape at the edge of the township line. This was where the best fishing was to be had. Everything from crappie to largemouth bass gathered in the deep pool at the fork in the river. It was where I first saw her. As I cast my line out, searching for brim, something darted off behind the large rock just beyond the right branch of the fork. I called out to see if someone was there. "Hey!" Who's there?" I shrugged it off and continued my fishing. I reeled in my line and started shedding it off the pond scum that gathered on the bottom of the pool. Right as I went to cast out again, something peeked out from behind the rock. As I turned my attention to it, it darted back into the cover of the rocks. "I saw you that time," I called out as I cast my line back in, not much caring who it was at that point. "Ain't no need in hiding any more." Then she spoke. She poked her head out from behind the rock, blushing from scalp to chin. She was strawberry blonde and fair-skinned, with a sheepish grin that spilled over her maw. "Would you mind turning to face back upriver?" she said timidly. I'm not decent." "Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry. I didn't—" "That's okay," she interrupted. "Just turn around so I can fetch my clothes." I turned around, about as red-faced as she was, I imagine. She was beautiful, and I had embarrassed both of us. "What's your name?" I shouted, my back toward her. "Emily." "Where'd you come from, Emily?" "I live just down the river on the side of the line." "Okay, I think you can turn around now," she said, still quite unsure of her state of modesty. She was a woman for that time. Soft curved hips and small breasts with rosy nipples that were excited by the river's chill. She wore a long white nightgown that had water drawn up the tail so far that she shouldn't have even bothered to cover herself. Between her breasts hung a small silver cross on a chain that was as dainty as its charm was. I turned away quickly, speechless. You still ain't all that decent, ma'am." I turned my head, ushering bashfully toward the small mounds on her chest as they peered out at me, dopily unaware of their inappropriate vainness. The minuscule pendant around her neck did nothing to hide her. "Oh," she squealed as she crossed her arms to cover herself. "I'm so sorry. Well, you know more about me than I normally care for a man to, but I still know nothing of you. What would you have me do?" "Take off your breeches," she said, nodding toward my belt. Uh, okay." The words came out a half question and very uncoordinated as far as words go. I unfastened my belt and was reaching for my fly when she interrupted me. "I was only kidding," she said with her head half cocked sideways and a gentle laugh in her words. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just thought it was fair, and it's okay. I can guarantee you I am way more embarrassed than you right now. What's your name, farmer boy?" Uh, uh, Jim. Jim Tanner." "Did you just make that name up, Jim?" she asked slyly, but very friendly. No, that is my name, I swear it," I replied. Each volley of conversation became more and more awkward for me as she stood there cool and collected, still covering her breasts. "Well, Jim," she pronounced my name slowly and very coy, "if that is your name, why don't you meet me here again tomorrow when I am more appropriate?" "Really?" "Yeah, sure. You're cute, and I'm fairly certain the laws of this state have pronounced us married since you saw my— I am so sorry about that. You don't have much of a sense of humor, do you, Jim?" I blushed again and produced nothing more than an incoherent series of stutters. She only giggled at my lack of confidence as she turned and skipped away downstream, kicking the water up in waves as she splashed away merrily. She turned her head, speaking over her shoulder in her signature slyness. "See you then, farmer boy." The following day I was right back down at the fork in the river. After catching a shitstorm from all my buddies for cutting out on them over some girl I didn't even know, I decided to carry my fishing pole, in the event that she left me holding my pecker in my hand. This way I could save a little face by bringing back enough fish to feed them all. It would at least afford me reprieve while they were chewing. I was still wary of why she would want to meet me again with the inappropriate introduction we shared, but I was joyous nonetheless. She was beautiful, and well, I was smitten. Everything about her was just right. Her hair seemed to wave like grain in the field as the wind played through it. Her skin looked to be soft, warm, and welcoming as that of a new child. Even her breasts, as taboo as they had been, intrigued me in the loveliest way. Yes, to some extent sexual, but mostly in an incomprehensible way. Yes, to some extent sexual, but mostly in an incomprehensible, new love blooming way. I felt foolish having fallen for her so quickly, but she never once disappointed me, and I suppose that's all a man could possibly ask for in a woman. I cast my line in cautiously. I hoped she wasn't swimming in the deep pool. It would tip the scale and awkward to hook her in the back like a nosy turtle. After a time passed in which I figured no girl could hold her breath, I reeled it in and cast out a few more times. Almost instantly I had a bite. Struggling with what I figured to be a bass or a catfish, I started reeling my line in. It fought ferociously as I tugged my line over one shoulder, then the next, hoping not to snap it. Dry leaves crunched somewhere in the woods. I suddenly had the feeling that I was being watched by someone with a hateful stare. I paid it no mind as I continued fighting with the greedy fish trying to steal my bait. Then the struggle stopped abruptly. With no warning, my line went limp. I thought for sure the monster fish on the other end had got loose, taking my bait as its reward. But I was wrong. I saw my bobber first, then the fish that was attached to the line emerged. It lay flat on its side, lifeless, bobbing up and down gently in the water. Then another fish rose, dead. Then another. Several more rose to meet my catch, dead as doornails. I stared in the mass of dead fish that had suddenly rose as if stricken by plague. I didn't notice Emily peek out from behind the large rocks she had previously hidden behind. When she finally spoke, it startled me out of my trance. "What happened?" she inquired. "I don't know. I hooked one, and they all died." "Do you think the water is poisoned?" Worry hung heavy in her words. "No, I don't think they would have all died together like that." "What could it be, then?" "I don't know." We stood there for quite some time staring at the phenomenon in front of us. It perplexed me to no end. After a while I finally broke the silence. "Why did you want to see me again? I mean, after seeing you naked, I would have swore you would never want to see my face again, ever." She simply smiled. Her cheeks turned rosy. "You're cute, and you had the decency to turn your head instead of staring at me like some sideshow. Most boys wouldn't have been so kind. I admire that. You don't see that too often." "You're welcome," I said with a playful smugness. "Well," she started, cocking her head to one side and glancing down at my crotch, "then there was your willingness to show me your privates in return for your seeing mine. That means a lot to a girl, you know." Dark red ran down my whole face, painting me shameful. I didn't know what to do, honestly. "Why, you never seen a girl naked before?" she asked with genuine curiosity, tilting her head again, anticipating my response. "You want the truth?" She nodded slightly, a smile cracked her gaze of intrigue. "Well, none that ever saw me looking at them naked." I tried to play it off as a joke, but I think she saw through me like a pane of glass. "Jim, I'm surprised at you. You always let a girl know when you see her naked." Her smile never faltered. "I've got a lot to teach you yet." She was perfect. I instantly wanted to touch her, to wrap my arms around her and plant my lips to hers. I wanted to do so much more. "I know it's rude to ask a lady her age, but how old are you, anyway?" "You're right. It is rude to ask my age." I dropped my head in slight shame. "But I am 19. I raised my head to meet her stare. Our eyes locked for several seconds. Waves of ecstasy and emotion consumed me. I had never been quite so stricken by a girl. She was special. I knew that then, the same as I know it now. Can I tell you something without you laughing at me? It was hard to say for a shy young man as I was then, but I had to say it, and I never regretted a single word. You are beautiful. I paused to gauge her reaction. She only giggled in delight. A grin crept across my glowing face as I spilled out more of my heart to this girl that I barely knew. And I know it's crazy, but I knew I loved you instantly. That's not too crazy, is it? Yes, Jim, that is very crazy. She paused. Her silence made me uneasy and scared. That's why I'm glad you said it first. My cheeks ached from smiling so much. I knew how a jack-o'-lantern must feel after sitting on a porch all October with that goofy grin sprawled across its face. I stood there awkwardly as we stared at each other. She finally broke the silence. Are you going to stay over there or come over here and kiss me? I paid no mind to the dead fish floating on the water as I dove in head first and swam to the fork in the stream. I stumbled out awkwardly and took her in my arms. Without a word, our lips came together, hard in a way I can only describe to you as perfect. Several days passed since our first kiss before I ever thought to ask her family name. McIntyre. The name sounded familiar to me. Those days turned into weeks, weeks turned to months, summer turned to fall. We met at the same place every day. The big rock on the right fork was our rendezvous point. We talked about everything: fishing, farm work, the people about town, and we kissed a lot. Long, passionate kisses as the river whispered by us, speaking softly of our romance. I loved working in the fields all day, but after meeting Emily, my workday couldn't go by quick enough. I longed for our daily meetings, and loathed our departures at duskfall. I loved her. Mr. Smith was my employer that summer. He owned around 50 acres or so. Cows littered roughly half of it, and the rest was tilled and sowed with grain, corn, and a very small, at least comparatively, garden plot. He had 4 dogs he used for hunting on occasion. He kept them in a lot near the back of his property to prevent their baying from disturbing his wife while they slept. I loved his farm and hoped to have one just like it one day, but I hoped for a small stream running through mine. I tanned without much trouble and stayed dark-skinned for most of the year. I kept my hair short enough not to get in my eyes during my labor, but long enough to keep my head from getting sunburnt. I wore jeans and a t-shirt every day. The jeans prevented my legs from getting all scratched up in the briars strewn across his cow pasture when I would have to venture out that way in search of a lost calf or to investigate a funny smell. My shirt stayed permanently imprinted on my bare chest, the sun's cruelest of jokes. My arms always had some nick, scrape, or cut on them. It was just part of my work. But so were bug bites. Mosquito bites popped up all over my hands, arms, and the exposed areas of my neck and chest. Occasionally I would have to dig out a chigger with my knife point, but not too often. I especially loathed the chore and worked extra hard to prevent having to put any more gouges in my skin. "Come on, boy," Mr. Smith called across the field. I never hesitated when he spoke. "We got to run down to the feed store to get some dog food before they close up for the day." "Yes, sir," I yelled back as I ran across the field, leaping over small rocks and briar patches as I went. We boarded into his old truck and left for town. I had never been to the feed store before that day. I was usually left to tend some sort of errand whilst Mr. Smith ran to town. He spoke to me stern, but never harshly. Treated me as well as I could hope, I suppose. "Boy," he called me, "I've got to run across state for a few days, and I want you to know where this place is. I'm going to leave you in charge while I run to look at a new bull. Think you can handle that?" We had to yell over the sound of the engine. His old truck was very old and very loud. "Yes, sir, I think I can handle that. But what will I do about money? I don't think I can afford the feed on my own." Don't worry about that. I'm going to start a bill while we're here, and I'll catch up on it later. You got that?" "Yes, sir." "If you do a good job, I'll give you a little extra to go blow at the fair. It's coming up in a week or so, you know." "Yes, sir," I said excitedly. "Thank you very much." Mr. Smith just looked at me and lifted the corner of his mouth in a half smile. We climbed out of the truck at the feed store and crossed the gravel parking area between the barn they kept the feed in and the little shed where you paid out. A cowbell clanged loudly as we opened the door. The little shed held a lot more than just a cash register. There were bridles for horses hung on the walls. A small shelf in the middle of the floor held boxes of sugar cubes, treats for horses. A sign hung just to the left of the door that advertised custom forged branding irons. "Hey, Bill," Mr. Smith greeted the man behind the register. "How are you today?" "Fair to middling, I suppose. How are you, Frank?" I'd never heard Mr. Smith's name until then. "I'm all right. Listen, I need some food for my mutts. I would imagine they would get awful hungry without it. Oh, and I need to start a tab while I'm here. I'll be out of town next week, and the boy needs to be able to take care of my place while I'm gone." "All right," Bill said politely. "We can handle that. Now, send your boy there out to the barn for what you need." Mr. Smith turned to me. "Jim, go out to the barn and get 2 bags of dog food. It'll be in the back right corner in a brown and orange bag. Put them on the truck and hurry back." "Yes, sir." While I was hunting for the brown and orange bags, I heard a truck crackling across the gravel toward the shed. Its tires squealed loudly as the driver applied the brakes. Then the door creaked open and slammed before I heard the bell on the door chime. Its welcome to the new visitor. I loaded the bags on the truck and walked back inside. "Come here and grab you a soda water," Mr. Smith said kindly and nodded toward the cooler behind the counter. "I'm paying for it. You work good, Jim. I think you deserve a treat." "Thank you very much, Mr. Smith." I tried to contain my excitement. It wasn't often you got a free soda water. I rummaged through the large metal cooler, finally setting on an orange drink. I popped the cap off and turned it up to take a big gulp. It was delicious. "By the way, Jim, I want you to meet someone." He turned to introduce me to the new man standing in the shed, looking very irritated for some reason or other. "This here is Mr. Jacob McIntyre." I then remembered where I had heard the name before. Mr. Smith had made mention of a McIntyre on several occasions. He had told me of having the prettiest daughter around, and didn't I know it? I switched my orange soda to my left hand before extending my right cordially. A goofy smile crossed my face involuntarily. "Hi, I'm Jim. Nice to meet you." McIntyre took my hand firmly when I continued my introduction. "You must be Emily's father." His grip tightened around my hand. His eyes suddenly were not irritated any longer, but full of rage. A burning hatred that you could see. My smile slowly faded away as his grip got tighter around my hand. Suddenly, his grip broke and his hand made a direct path to my throat. He squeezed just as he did my hand, pushing my back against the door. I couldn't breathe. I was scared. Mr. Smith and Bill charged the man, coming to my aid, but unable to break his grasp on my throat. I started to wheeze and sputter as I fought for air. The glass bottle I held fell to the floor and shattered. Orange liquid flooded the immediate area of the transgression. "Let him go, Jake! Let him go!" Both men chanted over and over in different intervals, but McIntyre's grasp grew stronger. Finally, Bill ran behind the counter and produced a revolver. He ran around the counter, thumbed back the hammer, and placed it to McIntyre's temple. "I said let him go, Jake," Bill warned, no fear at all in his voice. McIntyre finally released my windpipe. I gasped for air as my body fell to the floor, confused and lightheaded. "Go get in the truck, boy," Mr. Smith commanded. I stumbled to my feet, still searching for my breath. Mr. Smith scolded me for the first time since I had started working for him. "Go, now!" The cowbell clattered as I made my exit. I took my seat in the truck and overheard the next part of the conversation still going on inside. The voices too muffled to tell who was speaking. "What the hell is wrong with you, Jake? He was just a boy." Mr. Smith came out of the shed, his steps heavy and long. He flopped himself into the truck with apparent annoyance. His brow was furrowed and dipped in the center. He was angry. "You about got yourself killed back there pulling that little stunt. I don't want you to do some shit like that again, boy. Am I clear? Your father would have my ass if something happened to you. It'd be a shame for him to end up like Jake back there." "I'm sorry. I understand, sir." Without another word, he cranked the truck and started back to the farm. All the way there, I wondered what exactly it was that I did wrong. What upset all three men so badly? I was too ashamed to ask Mr. Smith of my farce just then. We rode to the farm in silence as I contemplated my actions. The next week was tough. I gained a new respect for Mr. Smith. Tending the farm by myself was tough and led to longer work days just to be able to keep up. My meetings with Emily were late and short, but she seemed to understand completely. We still enjoyed each other's company and the time we had. I told her nothing of my encounter with her father. When Mr. Smith returned with the new bull, he did just as he had promised. With my paycheck, he included an extra $5 just for the fair. I was ecstatic. I loved the fair. Still do, actually. If it weren't for this damn wheelchair, I would go every year. Mr. Smith let me off early that day. I thanked him graciously and ran all the way home to get ready. I washed the dirt and dust off of me and donned cleaner clothes. I called up with all of my buddies to see if they would like to accompany me. Seeing as we didn't have much time to spend together since I met Emily, Joey was the only one who cared to go with me, so we lit out to the fair alone. The bright colored lights and the smells from the vendors was enough to drive any man insane with joy. Even at the age of 20, I was still no more than a child at the fall fair. The rides whirred and sung mechanically, and the animals chanted inharmoniously. All of it came together to create the most beautiful cacophony you would ever care to witness. I had in mind that I was going to win Emily a prize. It was to be a small token of my affection. I tried to knock the milk bottle over with the baseball, to no avail. I tried to make the ping-pong ball into the fish bowls. I even tried to pop the balloons with the darts. All were failures. I was down to my last 75 cents. I was desperate to win Emily something, and if I didn't, I would buy one of the toys from a carny and tell a little white lie, proclaiming to have won it for her. I then heard a small ding, followed by a splash of water. A dunking booth. I was a pretty good aim in my youth, and figured if I was going to win something, this would be where to do it. I shuffled into the short line and waited impatiently for my shot to drown the clown, as the attendant so delicately put it. "Step right up, young man. Let's see if you've got what it takes. You give me a quarter, and I will give you in return 3 chances to dunk my pal here into that cold water beneath him." I handed the carny my quarter and got 3 baseballs in return. I started to concentrate real hard. I threw the first one. "Oh, you ain't gonna earn no prize like that, kid," taunted the clown. My second throw, a miss as well. The clown chuckled obnoxiously as my doubts set in and the tension mounted. The third throw, I threw it as hard as I possibly could and followed through to my feet. Time slowed down as the ball glided across the air like it was spinning on ice. It was high and left of the red metal plate. It was a miss for sure. But miraculously the ball dropped and curved back to the right, lining up perfectly with the target. Ding! Splash! We have a winner, folks. I jumped up and down in the light of my own glory. I had won. "What do you have, kid?" I gazed over the toys a couple times before seeing the perfect gift for Emily. A little pink bear, no bigger than my outstretched hand, hung in the middle of the prize board. I want that pink one there, for my girl. What's your girl's name, son? He asked, very intrigued. Emily, I exclaimed joyfully. Well, I'm sure she'll be very proud of you. I smiled and nodded thankfully. That goofy smile broke out on my face again. Since I met her, it was becoming a chronic condition. I realized I still had 50 cents left to spend. Toward the exit gate stood a small red tent with a blue canvas top. Gypsy Fortune Teller was scrawled on a sign planted in front of it. I always thought the notion of the mystical, occult, and paranormal was foolish, but I would give it a shot. Upon entering, I was taken aback by the strong pungent herbs and incense that was burning. They left the room a smoky gas chamber, trying to steal your breath. In front of me was a small 5-sided table with a large deck of cards sitting beside a small candelabra. In the candelabra stood 5 red candles. They bled down the waxy sticks ominously. It gave me the creeps. A small woman sat in a chair across from where I entered, reading a very large and very old book. She raised her eyes to me, peeking over her spectacles before slamming the book shut. It spit a puff of dust as the pages reunited into a heap of yellowed paper, bound by what looked to have the texture of burlap. "Hello, may I help you, young man?" the lady welcomed slowly and politely. "I'm not sure I believe any of this, honestly, but I had a little money left, and I thought I would humor myself." "I'm glad you did. Do you know what it is I truly do?" she asked. I just shook my head quickly with a smug look caught on my face. "I'm a healer of sorts. Not of body, but of spirit. Now you look to me to be the type that believes in the spirit. Is that correct?" I nodded my head gently, still very skeptical of the whole deal. "Good, good, because the spirit believes in you." I glanced around her small tent, still very wary of what she had to say, but trying not to be disrespectful either way. There were bundles of herbs tied together like hands of tobacco, draped from the framework of the tent. A pile of books lay on the ground, stacked clumsily on a rug to separate them from the moist fall dirt beneath. Symbols and sigils that frightened me slightly decorated small tapestries hung about like drying laundry. "Please, sit. Ask me your questions," she said in an ethnic voice. "Are you really a gypsy?" She laughed heartily, throwing her head back. "You seem to be a man that appreciates honesty. So frankly," she started with a change of accent, "no. But people expect that whole Dracula bit when they meet me. I do, however, travel the country doing readings for people. I was blessed with a gift, but you can't convince these thick-headed bumpkins that God and spirits can coexist." She had my attention. She appeared to be in her mid-30s. Dark curly hair fell from under her staged bandana. High cheekbones swooped down to create shallow crevices at the corners of her mouth. She had large, pretty brown eyes that were sharp as a needlepoint. All in all, she was fairly attractive. "So what is it you come to learn, Jim?" "I never told you my name." I was shocked and starting to think otherwise of her act. "That is true. The spirit did." "What spirit?" my intrigue ever piquing. "The one that follows you," she said eerily. Goosebumps run up my back and collided at my spine, causing a tremor across my whole upper body. "Don't worry, Jim. It's not a bad spirit. It actually likes you. A lot." I shrugged again as the relentless waves of goose flesh crept up and down my body. I wasn't sure why this troubled me so. A child of only 4. She was a little girl when she lived. Do you know this girl?" "No, ma'am. I don't know any small children, I don't think." "Nonetheless, she is very fond of you, young man. she said with a smile. "How much is this going to cost me, anyway?" I had forgotten to ask. "I charge $1 for my services, but your spirit friend tells me you only have 50 cents left to spend, and I have quite enjoyed your company this evening, though brief as it may have been. So, no charge to you, young—" She paused suddenly. A worried look crossed her face. She tilted her head as though listening for a whisper. "Oh, my," she finally said. "I don't know what this means." She spoke to something that wasn't there, at least something that wasn't visible. She looked concerned. It was enough to make the chills on my spine flare up again. "She tells me something dark had killed the beauty beneath. Do you understand that at all?" I had no clue what she was talking about, but I had learned enough in the past few minutes to take heed to the words. I shook my head, speechless. "He is listening," she says. "He is coming." I was frightened beyond my limit. Her cryptic warning was too much for me to take. I bolted out of the tent, knocking over the chair I had sat in, flipping back the flap of the door that enclosed the tent from the outside world. I ran out of the gates, all the way to the river. Those words hung with me all the way there. I wasn't sure what to make of those foreboding words, but I took them seriously enough to check over my shoulder every so often. I finally made it to the fork in the river. I rolled up my pants and shed my shoes and socks to wade across the shallow river branch. I splashed heavily up onto the small island in the middle of the two rivers, running along either side. I looked around, but found no sign of Emily. I called for her several times, but got nothing. "Looking for me, stranger?" She appeared from nowhere behind me. I was startled a little bit by her sudden presence. "Yeah, I brought you a present," I said as I extended the pink bear in her direction. "Presents are normally wrapped, I believe." I looked a little dismayed, I'm sure, but she cracked a smile to comfort me. She sensed my feelings were on the verge of being hurt. "This is a gift, and a rather lovely one at that. I love it." She leaned in to kiss me, holding the small bear against her chest lovingly. I had never gotten her a gift before. I wasn't sure how she would receive it, but I was pleased with the results. My head torqued around as a twig snapped somewhere close. I looked around in the dimming daylight to see what it was. I saw nothing of interest in the thick undergrowth and a fence of trees. "Did you hear that?" I inquired of her as I still searched for the culprit. "You reckon it was a deer?" "No, no," she said, with an unusual tone in her voice. "It was fear." "You have to leave now. It's my father." "So what? I've met him before." I turned around and she was gone, without a sound. I searched everywhere for her. It wasn't like her to just run off like that. Another rustle in the woods behind me. I paid it no mind as I continued my search for Emily. Then that strange event happened again. A bird fell dead just to my right. A squirrel bounced off of my head. Another bird tumbled to the ground in front of me, all dead, just as the fish had been. Suddenly, a dull blow leveled me. A sharp pain ran across my shoulders. I writhed on the ground, trying to dim the pain. I rolled to my back to see Jake McIntyre standing above me with a thick branch held between his large hands like a baseball bat. "What are you doing out here, boy?" "I just came to see your daughter. What's the problem with that? Why did you hit me?" He looked puzzled and unamused at the same time. He glanced around quickly, looking for anyone who might have saw his malicious deed. "The hell are you talking about, boy? You trying to prove something?" I had no idea what he meant, but I was in too much pain to concentrate anyway. "No, sir, I just came to give your daughter a bear I won at the fair." He pressed his massive boot into my chest, holding me to the ground. The weight was immense and made it hard to breathe. I knew his intentions were no good. "You're either insane or very sick, boy. I tried to crawl away, scratching at the ground for something to pull myself away with. A root would have been perfect, but all I found was a loose rock, about the size of my fist. He leaned down closer to my face. "How did you know where to find her?" he asked, with that same devilish look in his eyes from the feed store. "How did you know she was here?" "We met here while I was fishing." "Why do you keep talking like that, boy? Are you off your rocker?" he taunted. He pushed his bludgeon up under my chin, before raising it to thrash me across the face with it. It won't much matter in a few seconds. I was losing consciousness. Everything was going black. Blood filled my eyes and mouth from the damage of the last blow. Jake raised his bludgeon above his head like an axe. He was going to kill me. I started a prayer, asking God to save my soul and usher me into his kingdom. I never finished it. The pain was intense. I passed out. I was woke by a large thunderous sound echoing through the trees and something warm dripping on my face. My eyelids fluttered open to see Jake's massive hand clutching his chest. He tottered back and forth, barely able to keep balance. His arm went limp, revealing a large bloody socket dead center of his breastbone. The sun shone through in little soggy rays that glistened off of raw meat and bone. He fell to his side, dead. A splashing came from across the river. My sight still faded in and out. Two voices beckoned to me. They called me by name. "Are you all right, son? Wake up, man. Come on, get up." Joey and Mr. Smith stood above me. Mr. Smith held his old rifle in one hand and shook me back to reality with the other. "Come on, boy, get up. We need to get you to the hospital. This looks bad," Mr. Smith said as he shook me. "Help me get him up, Joey." Together they raised me to my feet. My head bobbed loosely on my shoulders. "Where is Emily?" I said in short gasps, barely audible. "Is she okay?" Mr. Smith looked at me with a sorrowful look in his eyes. "Emily's dead, Jim." Joey stood silent with a puzzled look on his face. He had no idea who we were speaking of. "No," I said, "she can't be dead." As my head bobbed up and down, I caught a glimpse of pink floating in the deep pool just before the river forked. My strength and consciousness returned instantly. I broke free of the two men who had acted as crutches seconds before. I bolted toward the river, diving headlong into the water. I swam to where the bear bobbed in the water. I took a deep breath and dove straight under. The water was murky and I couldn't see anything, but something grabbed my wrist. Someone grabbed my wrist. Emily, I thought. I grabbed hold of her tiny arm and kicked like mad to get back to the surface. She was heavier than I had expected. I reached the surface with a gasp. My eyes stung from the dirty water. My wounds were on fire, it seemed. I couldn't hold my eyes open between the two sensations. I heard Mr. Smith to my left. "Damn it, boy! Are you touched or something? You trying to die?" I kicked hard toward his voice. I pulled her body above the water, hoping she would start breathing. She didn't. I finally felt the shore as I kicked and clawed my way to dry land. I was still blinded, and my senses didn't work so well. "Holy Mother of God!" Mr. Smith exclaimed. "Joey, go get the law. Hurry up, boy." I laid there panting and trying to wipe the stinging from my eyes. I finally succeeded. I was surprised and appalled at what lay upon my chest. A young child, at one time or other, in a white nightgown, soggy and lifeless, was sprawled across my heaving chest. It had to be no older than 3 or 4 years when it was deposited. I scrambled away from it, panicked. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" It was severely decayed. Its eyes were long removed, and the sockets were hollow. Little bits of gray wet flesh dangled around the openings. The hair was thin and scraggly. The nose was drawn up to a sharp point. The arms and legs were bony and missing skin in places. A short length of rope was tied around one ankle and secured to a cinder block. A small silver cross lay on the dirt. It hung from a small silver chain wrapped around the vertebrae. A small silver chain. Emily? I passed out. There was a bright light coming from my right side. I turned my head toward the source. Trees and flowers punctuated a perfect lawn. It was a window and the sun was shining. I rolled my head to the other side. It hurt a lot. Standing beside me was Mr. Smith and Joey. A deputy stood at my feet. That's when I noticed my blue gown. I was in the hospital. "How are you feeling, boy?" Mr. Smith asked. "Emily," was my response. "That's why I'm here," the deputy stated. "How did you know Emily was in the river?" I had no certain answer for him. I was still devastated by the truth. Emily was dead. But how? The deputy started explaining. He filled in gaps that I had no clue were missing. He told me how Jacob McIntyre had a 4-year-old daughter go missing 15 years before. He told me how they suspected murder, but with no body they had no case. They told me of Jake's spotted past of domestic abuse and assault, just to name a few. I told them the truth. They said I needed rest. I agreed. While I slept, a figure came to me, a slender girl with soft curves, a silver cross dangling from her neck, and twinkled in the bright white light that surrounded her. "Emily." "I am free now, Jim, and it's all thanks to you. I was trapped beneath the river until you came along. They let me into heaven. They said I was so young when I died that I was still pure and free of sin. I am more grateful to you than you will ever know. I love you, Jim. I will see you again soon enough." She faded back into the light. I was unable to speak to her in that dream. It saddened me and filled me with joy all at the same time. She guaranteed me, if I played my cards right, someday I would be able to see her again. I woke with tears streaming down my face. She was gone for good. It would be quite some time before I would see her again. Being raised in church, I knew suicide was not an option, though the thought crossed my mind on more than one occasion. But that was no way to die. That was for cowards, anyway. So I have never been with another woman since I lost her, and I've held out just fine so far. I am 93 now, and I don't have much longer to wait. And though I do some things I'm sure she would not be proud of, I still pray every night, asking God to bless me and bless her. I ask for my sins to be forgiven in the hope that I will be able to return to her one day soon.